The morning light over Bardstown fell soft and gold, spilling across quiet Kentucky streets still draped in autumn's last breath. It was the kind of morning that felt almost too still, like the world was holding itself before something big, something fragile. For Amy Slaton, that stillness carried both peace and a tremor of ache. She stood in front of a mirror, her reflection half dressed, half lost in thought. The woman staring back was no longer the same one who had first appeared on national television years ago, no longer buried beneath the weight of the world, nor quite free of it either. Her eyes, tired yet shining, traced her own face like she was studying a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe that was what it meant to grow, to lose parts of yourself in the process of becoming something new. In just a few hours, she would be walking down the aisle again. A Halloween wedding. Her kind of day. Quirky, strange, beautiful in all its imperfection. The decorations were already set. Flickering candles, pumpkin lanterns carved with mischievous grins, dried autumn leaves curling across tabletops. The venue, the Talbot Tavern, a historic inn with whispers of ghosts in its walls, felt like something out of a dream she'd once scribbled in a teenage diary. But today, her dream trembled under the weight of something heavier: absence. Tammy wasn't coming. Amy's chest tightened each time she thought of her sister. The two had built an empire of raw honesty and struggle together. 1,000 LB sisters, the world called them. But to Amy, they were just Tammy and Amy. Two girls from Kentucky who loved too hard, fought too loud, and kept finding their way back to each other through every storm. And yet, this storm felt different. The fight had started days before the wedding. It was supposed to be about the venue. Tammy didn't want to set foot in a haunted place. She'd called it cursed, a space filled with demons and bad energy. But deep down, Amy knew it wasn't really about the ghosts in the tavern. It was about fear, change, and the widening distance that neither of them knew how to bridge anymore. Amy could still hear Tammy's voice from that last argument, sharp, trembling, almost breaking. "I ain't going to no haunted wedding, Amy. Not with demons and all that mess." Amy had tried to reason, her voice shaking. "It's not about that, Tam. It's just me. It's my thing. I just want you there." But Tammy's tone had hardened. "No, not somewhere cursed. Not this time." Amy's tears came before she even realized she was crying. "You should go there and support me." "You're out of your mind now," she'd shouted. But even then, her anger was just grief in disguise. Now, on the morning of her wedding, the silence where Tammy's voice should have been felt louder than any scream. The makeup artist tried to distract her with small talk, asking about her dress, about Brian, about the decorations. But every mention of family made Amy's throat tighten. She nodded, smiled through it, pretending that everything was fine, because that's what cameras and people and fans expected from her. The happy bride. The comeback story. The woman who found love again. But no one really saw the layers beneath that smile. The fear of starting over, the guilt of moving on too fast, the ache of knowing her sister might be watching from a distance, judging, hurting, but still not here. Brian Lavern, tall, gentle, and a little goofies, had proposed just 5 months after they started dating. It happened inside a haunted house, the kind where fake ghosts jump out and laughter hides the heartbeat of nerves. Amy had said yes almost before he finished asking. After everything she'd lost, her marriage to Michael Halterman, the quiet crumble of love that had once felt certain, the sleepless nights raising her 2 sons alone, this felt like a piece of life she could still believe in. Love, even if it came wrapped in chaos. She thought back to the first night she'd met Brian. It was at a small fairground just outside of town, the air smelling like funnel cakes and old hay. He'd made her laugh so hard she forgot for a moment how heavy her own story had become. That laughter had felt like oxygen, like something she hadn't breathed in years. Still, her family thought it was too soon. Too quick. Too impulsive. And maybe they were right. But Amy wasn't the kind of woman who measured love in years or logic. She measured it in warmth. Now, as the camera crew began setting up for the day's shoot, capturing behind-the-scenes shots of the decorations and dress, Amy stood near the window, watching the wind move through the trees. She could almost imagine Tammy's voice beside her, teasing her for crying over makeup, telling her to stop being such a baby. Instead, there was only the faint hum of her own breath. She remembered what she'd told the producers during one of those quiet confessionals that always aired between the big moments. "Being here with my siblings, them back-talking me all day. I'm tired of it. If Tammy don't come, she just don't. I can't keep waiting on her to understand my happiness. It was the kind of sentence you say when you're trying to be strong, when your heart is breaking, but you need to convince the world that it's not. Amy blinked hard, trying to hold herself together as Elijah Davis, her close friend, entered the room. Elijah had been her rock, the one who'd listened to her late-night doubts, who'd told her she deserved this happiness, that she didn't need anyone's permission to move forward. He smiled gently as he handed her a small bouquet. You ready, girl? Amy nodded. Yeah, I think so, but her voice cracked halfway through the words. In that moment, she realized she had chosen Elijah as her maid of honor, not just because of loyalty, but because she couldn't bear the thought of that empty space beside her where Tammy should have been. In her first wedding, back in 2019, Tammy had stood right there. They had laughed, cried, and promised that no matter what, they'd always show up for each other. And now, that promise had faded into silence. Still, Amy whispered a quiet prayer to herself as she picked up her dress and looked into the mirror one last time. Please, just let her be okay. Let her know I love her. Outside, the sun began to sink lower, washing the world in gold and crimson, like the whole town was holding its breath for the bride who carried both love and heartbreak in her hands. And somewhere, not too far away, Tammy sat in her room, scrolling through photos she wouldn't admit to watching, whispering words she'd never say out loud. Be happy, Amy. Even if it ain't with me there. The distance between them, emotional and physical, had never felt so wide. Yet beneath all the pain and stubbornness, both sisters carried the same silent truth. They had always been each other's ghosts, haunting one another with love that refused to die. Evening began to fall over Bardstown, turning the air cool and sharp as if the world was shifting into another story. Inside the Talbot Tavern, amber light poured from the chandeliers, dancing across the walls lined with old photographs. Reminders of centuries past, of laughter and whispers, of lives once lived. To anyone else, it was a charming old building. But to Amy tonight, it was something else entirely. It was a stage, a fragile place where love, loss, and courage were about to meet. As guests began to arrive, laughter filled the air, the soft murmur of conversation echoing through the hallways. Everyone seemed to be leaning into the Halloween spirit. Subtle masks, lace gloves, hints of black and burnt orange threaded through their clothes. There was a kind of warmth in the way people smiled at Amy as she passed, yet beneath it all, she could feel the tension humming quietly. The empty chair near the front row, the one that had been meant for Tammy, seemed to pull at her every time she looked toward it. The crew followed her movements carefully, capturing every blink, every breath, every pause. She had long since gotten used to cameras. But tonight, it didn't feel like reality TV. It felt like exposure, like every emotion she'd tried to bury was now standing under the lights with her. Brian was waiting for her outside, pacing nervously near the entrance, his hands stuffed in his pockets. His smile, soft, boyish, broke the tension the moment she saw him. You look beautiful, he said quietly when she approached. Amy laughed, brushing a tear from her cheek. You ain't even seen the whole dress yet. I don't have to, he said. I already know. That's the thing about Brian. He never tried to fix her. He just stayed, patient, kind, a little awkward sometimes, but always there. And that steadiness was something Amy hadn't known in a long time. Still, as the music began to swell, as people turned to look at her, she couldn't stop the ache that pulsed beneath her ribs. She wanted her sister there, not just for the pictures, not for the cameras, but because Tammy had always been there for the big moments, no matter how broken or angry they were at each other. They always showed up, but not this time. Earlier that week, when they'd argued, Amy had tried one last time to reach out. She'd called, her voice soft but trembling. Tammy, please. I just want you there. It's not about the place. It's about me needing you. Tammy had sighed on the other end, that deep, tired sound that came from years of pain. Amy, I can't. I don't believe in that haunted stuff. You know I don't. I'm trying to keep myself right, you know that. And Amy had wanted to scream that it wasn't about ghosts. It was about love. About showing up even when you didn't understand. But the words caught somewhere in her chest, too tangled in old resentment and new wounds. Now walking down the aisle, she felt the weight of that silence. Every step echoed like a heartbeat, Soft, deliberate, lonely. Flowed like a heartbeat. Soft, deliberate, lonely. People smiled, phones lifted, lights flashed. But Amy's eyes searched through the crowd, half expecting to see Tammy somewhere in the back, just standing there, maybe pretending not to care. She wasn't there. The ceremony began. The minister spoke words that Amy barely heard, her mind flickering between the present and the past. Flashes of her first wedding to Michael. The laughter, the nerves, the dreams they'd once built together. How it had all quietly unraveled, leaving behind 2 sons and a lifetime of what-ifs. And now, here she was again, standing in front of someone new, holding another man's hands, whispering new vows that felt like old prayers. Brian's voice broke through the haze. Amy, you've brought light into my life in ways I didn't know I needed. You've taught me that love isn't perfect, but it's real. And I promise to keep choosing you, no matter what ghosts we carry. For a moment, Amy smiled. It was small, trembling, but it was real. When her turn came, she looked into his eyes and said softly, Brian, I know I come with baggage. I come with history, with tears, with laughter, with a whole lot of mistakes. But you saw me. Not just the version of me on TV, not the weight, not the noise, just me. And that's all I've ever wanted. Applause filled the room when they kissed. That sweet, fleeting moment that made everything seem okay, at least for now. But as she leaned into his arms, her eyes flicked once more toward the empty chair. And something inside her whispered, this happiness would have felt more whole if Tammy were here. Later, when the crowd shifted into celebration, dancing, laughter, the low hum of clinking glasses, Amy slipped away for a moment of quiet. She stepped outside into the crisp Kentucky night. The streetlights flickered softly, and the faint sound of music followed her through the old wooden doors. She breathed in the air, heavy with wood smoke and fallen leaves. And then, without warning, the tears came. Not the kind you plan for, but the kind that break through when your heart's been carrying too much for too long. I just wanted her here, she whispered to no one. That's all. Elijah found her there, sitting on the tavern steps in her wedding dress, mascara smudged and bouquet slightly wilted. You okay? He asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded, lying like people do when they're trying to be strong. Yeah, just needed a minute. He sighed, looking out toward the quiet street. You know she loves you, right? She's just still figuring herself out. Amy didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because love between siblings like hers and Tammy's was complicated. It wasn't clean, or easy, or even always kind. It was full of unspoken apologies and stubborn pride. But it was love all the same. Somewhere, Tammy was probably watching. Maybe on TV, maybe through photos. Maybe just imagining it. But she'd feel it. That ache of missing, of almost being there. Back inside, as the night wore on, Amy found herself laughing again. She danced with her sons, little Gage holding her hand, Glenn clinging to her dress, and for a while, everything felt right. She looked over at Brian, at Elijah, at the small circle of friends who had shown up for her, and she let herself breathe. It wasn't the wedding she'd dreamed of. It wasn't perfect. But maybe that was the point, because life, Amy thought, isn't about the people who always understand you. It's about the ones who stay, even when you don't make sense. And though Tammy hadn't stayed this time, Amy knew somewhere deep down that their story wasn't over. It never really was. The days after the wedding passed in a kind of strange quiet, the kind that comes after laughter fades, when the candles have burned down and the guests have gone home. The Talbot Tavern had emptied out, leaving behind faint traces of celebration. Stray confetti in the corners, forgotten glasses, a lingering scent of spiced cider and vanilla candles. Amy sat alone in her kitchen the next morning, her hair still slightly curled from the night before, her dress folded across the chair beside her. The early light poured through the window, touching everything with a softness that didn't quite reach her eyes. The world saw a happy bride. But the truth, the kind that never makes it to television, was quieter. It was the empty phone screen that hadn't lit up with Tammy's name. It was the ache of scrolling through her wedding photos and feeling a missing shape in every frame. She wanted to tell herself it didn't matter, that she had her new husband, her boys, her friends. But deep down, a part of her still waited for that message, that call, that sign that her sister cared. Tammy, meanwhile, was back home, scrolling through social media posts of the wedding she had refused to attend. The comments were endless. Fans picking sides, speculating, judging. Some called Amy childish, others called Tammy selfish. But neither sister read far enough to care. The noise had become too much. For Tammy, it was easier to stay silent. Easier to believe that staying away had been the right choice. After all, she'd spent the last 2 years rebuilding her life from near death. The world had watched her lose over 500 pounds, watched her collapse, rise, heal, and shrink until she was barely recognizable. People called it a miracle. But what they didn't see were the nights of pain, the surgeries, the loneliness of living in a world that suddenly treated her differently. And while fans praised her transformation, Tammy still felt something missing, something that even the weight loss couldn't fix. Amy used to be the one who filled that emptiness. Now, that bond, the one that had carried them through their heaviest, darkest days, felt fractured, almost invisible. They were sisters, yes, but they were also human beings trying to become whole in their own ways. For Amy, the healing came not through weight loss, but through color, through paint. It started quietly, in the corner of her living room, where she'd set up a small easel one rainy afternoon. The first canvas was simple: blue skies, a little house, 2 stick figures holding hands. Her sons had laughed and called it Mommy's funny painting. But something about that moment, the smell of paint, the stillness, the way she could lose herself in color, felt like oxygen. She began painting every night. Long after the boys were asleep, her hands moving instinctively. Each brushstroke carried a piece of something she couldn't say out loud. Some nights the canvases were bright, all yellows and soft pinks. Other nights they were stormy, smeared with gray and deep red, like her heart was trying to speak a language she hadn't learned yet. Then, one afternoon, she posted a photo of one of her paintings on Instagram. She didn't expect much, just a few likes, maybe a kind comment or two. Instead, the post exploded. Messages flooded in. "You have real talent, Amy. This is so peaceful. I didn't know you were an artist." And then came the moment that changed everything. A fan named Katie reached out, asking to buy one. Amy had stared at the message for nearly an hour before replying. "Really? You want to buy my art?" Katie responded instantly. "Yes, it's beautiful." When Amy shipped it off, a small painting of a sunset bleeding into the ocean, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the kind that came from fame or attention, but from creation. From knowing that something she made with her hands was now hanging on someone else's wall. She posted a thank you message on Instagram that night. "So thankful for Katie buying some of my art from me. My first sale. Hopefully more to come." The photo showed Amy smiling, really smiling, holding the painting before packaging it. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed with quiet joy. For once, it wasn't about cameras, producers, or scripts. It was just her, raw, creative, and alive. Of course, the internet had its opinions. It always did. Some praised her. Others questioned her motives. There were whispers of jealousy, that Amy couldn't handle Tammy's success and was trying to find her own spotlight. But those who really knew her, Elijah, Brian, her boys, saw it differently. "She's finally finding herself," Elijah said once in an interview. For so long, Amy was just Tammy's sister, or the one who lost weight faster, or the funny one. But now she's learning who she is without comparison. She's learning that she's enough. Still, the public's voice was loud. Critics resurfaced the old narrative that Amy had moved too fast with Brian, that she was reckless, unstable, maybe even jealous. Amy read the comments late at night, scrolling through her phone until the words blurred together. It hurt, of course it did. But she had learned something over the years of being watched by millions. People don't see what's real. They see what fits their story. What was real was quieter. Her son Gage's laughter echoing through the hall, Glenn's tiny hand gripping her finger, the soft hum of a paintbrush against canvas, Brian's quiet support as he cooked breakfast while she painted. What was real was the silence between her and Tammy, not cruel, not angry, but heavy. Sometimes she would open her phone, her finger hovering over Tammy's name, ready to call. But she never pressed it. Maybe Tammy needed space. Maybe they both did. Meanwhile, Tammy had her own kind of healing to face. Her new life, one of discipline, therapy, and constant public scrutiny, once was strange. After the surgeries, after the transformation, the world had started seeing her as inspirational. but inside she was still just Tammy. The girl who'd once been scared to hope. The girl who had watched her sister walk away into new love and didn't know how to be happy for her without feeling replaced. Late one night, she watched a clip from Amy's wedding that had gone viral. Amy in her black lace gown, laughing, crying, dancing with her sons. The crowd around her glowing in warm candlelight. Tammy smiled softly, the glow of her phone lighting her face. "She looks happy," she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself mean it. There were still things unsaid between them. Maybe there always would be. But love, the stubborn, complicated kind that only sisters understand, was still there, pulsing beneath everything. And while Amy painted her future in color, Tammy was learning to live in her new skin. Both women were rebuilding, differently, separately, but somehow together. Amy's art corner grew over time. Canvases stacked against the walls, brushes stained with stories she hadn't yet told. Each painting carried a piece of her, a small rebellion against everything the world thought it knew about her. Because for once, Amy Slaton wasn't just a reality star. She was a woman creating something of her own, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start forgiving herself for all the ways life had broken before. The first storm hit online. It began as whispers, little comment threads under photos, the kind that start with no hate and end with venom. Amy had posted a video of herself painting, her sons in the background laughing, her hair messy and tied up. To most people, it was nothing more than a sweet clip, a glimpse of a mother trying to balance motherhood, love, and her new art. But to the internet, it was another reason to dissect her. She's moving on too fast. She's jealous of Tammy. She's using art for attention. Amy didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only armor she had. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were nights she sat in the dark after putting the boys to bed, scrolling through her phone, each cruel word landing like a bruise. She knew she wasn't perfect. She'd never pretended to be. But the way people could take her smallest joys and twist them into something ugly still amazed her. Brian noticed. He'd come into the room quietly, sitting beside her on the couch without saying a word. His presence was simple, grounding. After a while, he'd reach over and take the phone from her hands, setting it face down on the coffee table. "They don't know you," he'd say softly. Amy would nod, her eyes glossy. "I know, but sometimes it feels like maybe they're right. Maybe I am just a mess trying too hard." Brian shook his head. "No, you're a woman trying to live. That's all. Those moments mattered, the small, tender ones that didn't make it into the show. The kind that kept her standing when everything else felt like quicksand. Tammy, on the other hand, was in the middle of her own kind of storm. The world loved a redemption story, and hers had become one of the most dramatic in reality TV history. From being confined to a hospital bed to walking, from dependency to independence, her transformation was the stuff of documentaries. But when the cameras left, the applause faded. The silence that followed was its own kind of noise. At night, she'd lie awake, her body smaller, but her thoughts heavy. The comments that once celebrated her now questioned her every move. She's changing too fast. She looks unhappy. She's lost the weight, but has she found herself? Sometimes Tammy wondered if that's all they'd ever see, the before and after. Never the in-between. And yet, even in her solitude, she found herself thinking about Amy more and more. About the fight. About the wedding she hadn't gone to. About how her sister had stood up and moved forward, despite everything. She hadn't called Amy in weeks. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to start. What do you say to someone you've hurt without meaning to? To someone whose joy you couldn't bear to watch because it reminded you of your own loneliness? One night, Tammy opened her phone and scrolled through Amy's art page. The latest post was a photo of a painting. 2 trees standing side by side, their roots intertwined beneath a sunset. The caption read simply, "Even when they grow apart, they still share the same ground." Tammy stared at it for a long time, her throat tightening. She knew instantly what it meant. Amy had always spoken through her emotions, but now she was painting them instead. Without overthinking, Tammy typed a comment. "This one's beautiful. Sis." She hesitated before hitting send, her finger trembling slightly. But she did. Hours later, when Amy saw the notification, she froze. Her breath caught. Tammy hadn't commented on anything of hers in months, not since before the wedding. She clicked it open. Just 6 words. But they carried more weight than all the others combined. Amy didn't reply right away. She stared at the message for what felt like forever, her chest filling with that strange mixture of love and sorrow that only family can bring. When she finally did respond, it wasn't a grand speech. Just a heart emoji, small, simple, real. That night, both sisters sat in their separate homes, miles apart, and felt the same quiet thing. Relief. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but makes living with it a little easier. Still, outside that fragile peace, the noise continued. When Season 7 of 1000 LB Sisters aired, the public had plenty to say. Amy's wedding drama became a trending topic. Fans replayed the arguments, dissected every word. Tammy's weight loss and surgery recovery drew praise but also suspicion. Every smile, every tear was picked apart for hidden meaning. To the world, it was entertainment. To them, it was their lives. Amy gave an interview during the press week, sitting in a bright studio under harsh lights. The host asked her about the wedding drama, about Tammy's absence. Amy smiled faintly, but her voice was steady. Families fight, especially sisters, but love don't just stop because you argue. It just changes. It learns to be quieter. When the clip aired, fans called her mature, strong, but the truth was, she had rehearsed those words 100 times in her head before saying them out loud. Behind the calm, Amy still missed her sister, and Tammy, though she didn't say it, missed Amy too. One afternoon, after a particularly harsh online episode premiere, Amy turned off her phone and sat by her painting table. The house was still. Glenn was asleep in his crib. Gage was building something with blocks on the floor nearby. She dipped her brush into a shade of soft blue, the kind that reminded her of summer mornings, and began to paint. Slowly, gently, layer by layer, she painted 2 figures again, this time closer together. The background was hazy, undefined, but the figures were strong. Unfinished, yes, but standing side by side. When she finished, she stepped back and whispered, "We'll be okay." And in that quiet, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just painting pictures anymore. She was painting survival, resilience, forgiveness. The next morning, she posted the painting online. The caption read, "Sometimes love is learning to wait for someone to meet you halfway." Tammy saw it almost immediately. She didn't comment this time. She didn't have to, because some messages are better left in the silence between hearts that already understand. The world had changed again. Months passed. Seasons turned. The Slaton sisters were no longer the same women the world first met. The laughter, the pain, the surgeries, the heartbreak, all of it had shaped them in ways that no one could edit or script. For Amy, life had softened. Not easier, just softer. The kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to prove anything. Her house was smaller now, quieter, but full of warmth. The walls held paintings, some finished, some not. Each one a memory she'd turned into color. Glenn's toys were scattered across the floor. Gage's laughter filled the air, and sometimes, late at night, she'd sit on the porch with a blanket and just breathe. She had learned to love that silence. Brian was still around. Not in the fairy tale way the world imagines love. No constant perfection, no scripted promises, but in the simple way that matters. He showed up, helped her clean the brushes, brought her coffee when she forgot to eat, played with the boys until their giggles filled the room, and he stayed. It wasn't a grand romance. It was real life, flawed, patient, steady. But there was still one absence that lingered in her heart. Tammy. They'd spoken a few times since that first comment. Short messages, polite check-ins. But nothing deep. Nothing like before. The kind of sister talk that used to stretch into the early hours of the morning. The kind that could only happen between 2 people who had shared the same pain for so long. Amy didn't push. She knew healing couldn't be rushed. Then one day, a letter arrived. Not a text. Not a DM, a real letter, creased edges, Tammy's handwriting on the front. Amy held it for a long moment before opening it, her hands trembling. Inside, the first line read, "I don't know how to start, so I'll just start." Tammy wrote about her therapy, her fears, her small victories. about learning how to cook for herself, how to drive again, how to walk without the cameras watching. She wrote about loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from feeling misunderstood. And then she wrote, "I know I hurt you. I know I made your happiness feel like something you had to hide. I don't want to do that anymore. You're my sister. You've always been my other half. And I want to see you, really see you, not through a screen." Amy's tears fell onto the page before she could finish reading. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just grabbed her keys, packed the boys in the car, and drove. The road stretched ahead like a memory. Miles of quiet fields, the same ones they'd once traveled together as kids. The autumn sun spilled gold across the sky. The autumn sun spilled gold across the sky. Late one night, she watched a clip from Amy's wedding that had gone viral. Amy in her black lace gown, laughing, crying, dancing with her sons. The crowd around her glowing in warm candlelight. Tammy smiled softly, the glow of her phone lighting her face. "She looks happy," she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself mean it. There were still things unsaid between them. Maybe there always would be. But love, the stubborn, complicated kind that only sisters understand, was still there, pulsing beneath everything. And while Amy painted her future in color, Tammy was learning to live in her new skin. Both women were rebuilding, differently, separately, but somehow together. Amy's art corner grew over time. Canvases stacked against the walls, brushes stained with stories she hadn't yet told. Each painting carried a piece of her, a small rebellion against everything the world thought it knew about her. Because for once, Amy Slaton wasn't just a reality star. She was a woman creating something of her own, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start forgiving herself for all the ways life had broken before. The first storm hit online. It began as whispers, little comment threads under photos, the kind that start with no hate and end with venom. Amy had posted a video of herself painting, her sons in the background laughing, her hair messy and tied up. To most people, it was nothing more than a sweet clip, a glimpse of a mother trying to balance motherhood, love, and her new art. But to the internet, it was another reason to dissect her. She's moving on too fast. She's jealous of Tammy. She's using art for attention. Amy didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only armor she had. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were nights she sat in the dark after putting the boys to bed, scrolling through her phone, each cruel word landing like a bruise. She knew she wasn't perfect. She'd never pretended to be. But the way people could take her smallest joys and twist them into something ugly still amazed her. Brian noticed. He'd come into the room quietly, sitting beside her on the couch without saying a word. His presence was simple, grounding. After a while, he'd reach over and take the phone from her hands, setting it face down on the coffee table. "They don't know you," he'd say softly. Amy would nod, her eyes glossy. "I know, but sometimes it feels like maybe they're right. Maybe I am just a mess trying too hard." Brian shook his head. "No, you're a woman